So here we see that cystic fibrosis is inherited as an autosomal recessive disease. If a carrier is crossed with an affected individual and they have 2 children, what is a probability that both children have cystic fibrosis? So let's go ahead and look at what happens if it is a carrier. So we will say that dominant is healthy and not affected with cystic fibrosis, but recessive means that you inherited the version of the protein that is misshapen and you can't transport chloride ions and therefore you have cystic fibrosis. So we see here that a person affected with cystic fibrosis is crossed with someone who is a carrier. So a carrier is another way of saying heterozygote. They do not have cystic fibrosis because they make one of their alleles or chromosomes has the correct directions on how to fold that protein channel. So when we look at the question asks, what is the probability that both children have cystic fibrosis? Well, let's go ahead and do a cross. So when we do this here, we see that there's a 50-50 chance that they will have a child with cystic fibrosis because we get it in a 1-to-1 ratio. So the first time that they have a child, there's a 1 out of 2 chance that their child will have cystic fibrosis. Now, the second time they have a child, there's also a 1 out of 2 chance that the child will have cystic fibrosis. But the question asks that both children have it. Now, I think sometimes that your answer, like the first instinct, is to say 50%. However, each of these are independent events. This is the first pregnancy, this is the second pregnancy. So the chance that both of them will have cystic fibrosis is we're going to multiply this. And so the likelihood of both children inheriting it is 1/4, or 25%. So let's see, practice with this a little bit more. If 2 carriers are crossed and have 2 children, what is the probability that both children will be affected? So here, when hybrids are crossed, we get that 3-to-1 ratio. If you want to do a Punnett square for this, here's a carrier and another carrier or hybrid. So you see that there's a 75% chance that none of their children will have cystic fibrosis, but there's a 25% chance that they will. So if we talk about 2 carriers having 2 children, what will be the probability that both will be affected? Well, here it's 1/4, and then the second pregnancy, it's also 1/4 likelihood. So the possibility of both of those happening is 1/4 times 1/4, which is a 1 out of 16 chance that both their children will be affected with cystic fibrosis. And let's go ahead and look at the third question. If 2 carriers are crossed, well, we've already done that, and have 2 children, what is the probability that neither child will be affected? Okay, well, there's a 3 out of 4 chance that none of the children will have cystic fibrosis, or the first child will not have cystic fibrosis. And then there's a 3/4 or 75% chance that the second child will also not have cystic fibrosis. So when we multiply this, we see that there's a 9/16 chance, or 9 out of 16, that probability that both children will not be affected with cystic fibrosis.